Thank you, Senator Murray. They'll be, I'm sure they will answer your questions. Mr. Robb, in August of 2015, the NLRB declined to assert jurisdiction over football players at Northwestern University who were seeking to form a union. In spite of this conclusion, the NLRB General Counsel issued a memorandum in October of 2016 stating that scholarship football players at private colleges and universities should be considered employees and protected by the National Labor Relations Act. Now, General Counsel memo is not binding. It doesn't have the force of law. However, it does direct NLRB officers how to apply the law. 25 years ago, when I was president of the University of Tennessee, I was on the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. It was headed by Bill Friday, the president of North Carolina, and Ted Hesburgh, the head of Notre Dame. Today it includes Arnie Duncan, the former Secretary of Education, and Paul Tagliabue, the former NFL commissioner, and some very distinguished people. Here's something that this group of university presidents and others emphasized. They said, quote, "We reject the argument that the only realistic solution to the problem of intercollegiate athletics, there have always been some, is to drop the student-athlete concept, put athletes on the payroll, and reduce or even eliminate their responsibilities as students. Such a scheme has nothing to do with education," the Knight Commission said, "the purpose for which colleges and universities exist. Scholarship athletes are already paid in the most meaningful way possible with a free education. The idea of intercollegiate athletics is that teams represent their institutions as true members of the student body, not as hired hands. Surely American higher education has the ability to devise a better solution to the problems of intercollegiate athletics than making professionals out of the players, which is no solution at all, but rather an unacceptable surrender to despair." Mr. Robb, do you believe it's appropriate for the NLRB General Counsel to tell the regional divisions that athletic scholarship students should be considered employees when the NLRB has clearly and very recently declined to assert jurisdiction?
The scheme of the National Labor Relations Act has the board as deciding the cases and the issues. The General Counsel acts more as a prosecutor for unfair labor practices. So in terms of overseeing the regional directors, the General Counsel's job is to ensure that the regional directors are following the law. I would not expect to act any differently if I become a General Counsel. I would expect them to follow the law as the board sets it forth. I'm not specifically aware of why that particular memo was issued, but it doesn't seem to be consistent with the direction that I would think regional directors should take in following the law.
Well, thank you. I hope you would give your attention to that because it's a very important issue to me. I was a student athlete at Vanderbilt University, and I didn't feel like I was an employee of Vanderbilt University. I felt like I got a good education.
I certainly will, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Stanton, Senator Murray mentioned the overtime regulation. My primary concerns with the overtime rule were, although I agree with what you said, that it was time to address it, but the way it was addressed caused a lot of bipartisan consternation in the United States Congress, and several bipartisan bills were introduced to try to change it. My concern were the rapid rate of increase. The salary threshold was set to double overnight. The harm it would cause to nonprofits, colleges, universities. I got all sorts of letters from private colleges and universities about how they would have to increase tuition in order to deal with the overtime rule. The proposed rule included annual increases based on inflation with only 2 months' notice. If the salary level is indexed to inflation, there should be plenty of time for employers to prepare, and the top number of 47,000 was just too high for many parts of the country. Now, raising the threshold would have a different effect in New York City than it would in Maryville, Tennessee, where I live. Should regional variance be taken into consideration when setting a national threshold in a new rule?
So, Senator, that is a very important question. I will tell you that when we in South Carolina were looking at complying with the regulation, we recognize that salary disparity and the regional disparity rather, and the impact it was having on South Carolina versus some other places. If confirmed as the wage and hour administrator, I recognize that I don't go in on a blank slate. I go in to enforce the laws that Congress has set and the statutes set by Congress. And because of that, I know that there are certain parameters to that. So my first question to the lawyers would be, would it be possible to have regional variations? And if legally possible to do that under the statute as it exists, then the second question would be, we need to look at the policy and the labor information behind it to make a decision.
Well, I would hope you would focus on that because, common sense just tells you that a threshold in Manhattan is different than New York is different than a threshold in Manhattan, Kansas, and some accommodation ought to be taken on that. Also, I would hope that you would especially look at the impact of whatever rule you develop on nonprofits. We had stories of Boy Scout districts having to lay off one or two employees, of church camps having to close, and a whole variety. Senator Isaacson made that point here. So I would hope you would focus on that. I think this is an excellent opportunity for the department to show the country what a good example of how to write a good regulation on overtime regulation. I look forward to what you do. I ask consent to introduce 2 letters of support for Ms. Stanton, 1 letter of support for David Zetesalo, and 3 letters of support for Peter Robb, including from a union, into the record. If senators wish to ask additional questions of the nominees, questions for the record are due by 5 p.m. Friday, October 6th. For all other matters, the hearing record will remain open for 10 days. Members may submit additional information for the record within that time. We will meet in 2 weeks to consider these nominees. Thank you for being here today. The committee will stand adjourned.